Um, Great. Pulling it up. Come on. Okay, here we are. And yeah, I got audio. Okay. And we've got viewers, so excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for digital security for abortion access with Kate Bertash, director of the Digital Defense Fund, and we also have the Roe Fund, or member of the Roe Fund, joining us. Just quick introduction. So, the Digital Defense Fund was founded in 2017, specifically for these kinds of trainings. Basically, yeah, to help people navigate increasingly restrictive laws around abortion. They also make some really great guides, and so that's partially what Kate will be going through just in a moment here. And then, yeah, the Roe Fund is Oklahoma is basically the only organization that is providing direct financial assistance to people seeking abortions. And they're just super knowledgeable about the current state of like laws in Oklahoma, resources in Oklahoma specifically. And so, yeah, super happy to have both of them, both these organizations joining, and think it will be really informative discussion. And so please leave any questions you have in the chat, and then at the end we'll have do a little Q&A and we'll go through those. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kate.
Perpetually on mute. Yeah, do you mind if I share I'm going to share my screen if that's cool. Let's get in there. Oops, I think you may need to enable sharing on my part. Let's see. Oh, there we go. I'm good. It might take me a second to. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us as we blow the dust off the internet tubes. All right, I'm here to actually walk through with you just a few digital security kind of issues, tips, and ideas, like we sort of talked through these changing landscapes. So we have here pregnancy, periods, abortion, and your digital security. So while it may feel private to browse the internet and use your phone to find info about abortions and reproductive health generally, many watch what we do online and use our phones to track what we do. I wanted to just remind everybody that all the information in this presentation actually applies regardless of the legal circumstances of your abortion. You have the right to withhold data from companies, from members of your household, from state, whoever else that you prefer. So let's talk a little bit about what the internet is, because I often forget too. The internet is not literally a cloud. It's a bunch of cables and computers. And here we have a video of a shark actually going and biting the internet, or one of the many transatlantic cables that actually runs our data back and forth. So lots of actors actually want our information, as it makes its pathway from our personal computer or our phone to our internet service provider to where a shark can bite it. Here you can see a couple of different threat actors that might be there, as noted by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who we'll reference a few times during this. So the responsibility of blocking these bad actors is kind of shared between platforms we use and ourselves. So I might have something that I use, like my email service is responsible for securing our data in transit, including along that transatlantic cable, securing our data where it's stored, and sharing what and how they share with our data with other services or entities. So we actually control a lot though. We control our login, what and how we choose to share with those services, what we share with other users, and we have physical control often of the devices we use to access those platforms. So our data is used for, I think we're going to talk about a couple of different sort of threats today, but I just wanted to note that this is out there too, that data can be also used for targeted advertising. So you can see here some issues with basic Facebook ads and kind of like tracking people based on who it presumes might be pregnant or have children. And I've included some links that we're going to get to at the end of this, of course, which is that there's some really, really interesting information from Privacy International and Chupadatos, which is an amazing name on how that sort of like economy of advertising works. And then, of course, reproductive coercion and criminalization, which is kind of a lot of what we're thinking about here today. So you can see here how an online search for abortion pills landed this woman in jail. And anti-abortion groups use smartphone surveillance to target abortion-minded women during visits. So Privacy International investigation into data usage by anti-abortion orgs found that intrusive data collection software and digital marketing systems are developed and promulgated around the world by powerful and politically connected US-based anti-abortion organizations. So a lot of that data of how we use to search the internet is also how we end up targeted by anti-choice organizations for advertising and misinformation. So when we're trying to figure out what's going to happen under new laws, we actually can look at what's happened previously under existing laws. So this graphic is actually a pre-trigger ban graphic, which says that laws in several states could be used to punish those who self-manage an abortion. And this info from Guttmacher Institute kind of gives us a little bit of that history of sort of how abortion has been prosecuted prior to Roe falling. So who gets reported for their abortions so far prior to Roe falling and how? Family, friends, partners, and neighbors are actually the most likely to turn in the person. Medical and hospital staff report to police based on drug tests, stereotypes, class, and racial profiling. So devices are then seized to extricate somebody's search history, a purchase history, and often text with trusted contacts. So that's what that Google search landed this woman in jail was about, was unfortunately the Google search had contributed to that charge. So here you can see a little bit more. There's a great report called Mass Extraction, the Widespread Power of Law Enforcement to Search Mobile Phones by Upturn, which basically prosecution for pregnancy outcomes to date disproportionately includes what we call consent searches. So this is when you are intimidated into handing over your phone, usually unlocked, and then a police officer will take it back, plug it into a special device that makes a clone of the drive. Then they hand your phone back to you, and that clone of the device is searched from incriminating terms and files. So that clone is actually kept forever and can be used in unrelated cases. Unfortunately, this is technology that was mostly developed in the context of the drug war. And so often, like those cloned drives that are already on file are often revisited by police departments to try and, let's say they need to get more arrests for drug crimes, they'll go back into those files and look for them. So it not only has a very present threat for the person, but also future threats. So we can actually learn a little bit more about how digital evidence has been used and will be used to criminalize pregnant people. I love this report. It's called Surveilling the Digital Abortion Diary by Cynthia Conti-Cook, who's a former public defender and incredible researcher in the space. And honestly, the mass extraction report is it's dense, but worth reading on how police collect digital evidence. So we try to use stuff like this to kind of patchwork together what might happen based on what has happened. These are the tools that are already in practice for what we might be leveraged now that Roe has unfortunately fallen. So who can be affected? Obviously, I hardly need to tell this audience, but those researching their abortion options online can be affected. Those who are looking for support in forums, those who have pregnancies actually that they wish to keep private just from certain people. I think it's like applicable across a lot of contexts. And those who are accused of crimes when seeking medical treatment for a pregnancy outcome. So you might want to think to yourself or type them in the chat, what are some other circumstances where someone might be worried about collection of data? So that can have a lot of consequences. And again, I don't want to discount the fact that some consequences are legal, like criminalization of pregnancy, abortion, and miscarriage, but they're also personal. Often they can be about revealing a pregnancy to a partner or parent, targeting by advertisers after a miscarriage of a pregnancy someone intended to carry to term, and targeting by anti-choice services and facilities in advertising. So it's a huge spectrum of risks that we're trying to mitigate here. So what can we do? So we want to narrow down out of what are the best digital security practices for everybody, the practices that we can do that are specific to our circumstances and the people we care about. So we've created this really incredible, I'm gonna actually ask our host to go ahead, and I will actually put it in the chat so you can follow along, but we have a pregnancy privacy guide or abortion privacy guide that I am going to pop over in the chat. Where's my chat window? Alrighty, here we go. We could just punch that over into the chat so our guests can follow along. Oops, let's go back one slide. Here we are. Okay, so this guide, actually, we got some help from an amazing group of artists to help us kind of put together some graphics to go with all these different pieces of information. What we tried to do here is like let you know that there are different threats that you might be concerned about, and then kind of walk through the solutions that might be applicable to your circumstance. So, for example, I often recommend that everybody, not just anybody who might be in these circumstances, can disable your ad ID on your phone, which is like a little kind of like piece in your settings that actually triggers a warning about getting less personalized ads. Good, that's what we want. These links contain instructions for that you'll get that are also on this guide on how to disable your ad ID on your specific type of phone. We try to look for Facebook and Instagram on how to turn those ad IDs off, Google accounts, or you can just search turn off ad ID and Snapchat or like whatever it is you want. So this one is really important. We want to limit the location data that our phone is sharing. So we're going to help protect against ads related to that, geofenced ads or warrants, and non-consensual tracking. So law enforcement doesn't have to collect this data. They can often just buy it. For example, the US military bought location data from a Muslim prayer app to try and target folks under some of the type of national security surveillance programs. Thanks for bearing with me. 1 second. Sorry about that, folks. I've been in calls all day, so it's been a little bit tough for me to go from one to the other. So I think it just take 1 more second. Thanks so much for bearing with me. It's been a really long day, so I really apologize that I'm quite a foggy state right now. So you also want to make sure that you don't save and rideshare apps in Google Maps, any of your home address or other information. So we often also really recommend that folks protect their phones with a strong PIN code. All iPhones and most Androids are automatically encrypted when you add a PIN code. Please double check this in your settings. I often even recommend that people use an alphanumeric passcode. You might not be aware that your phone doesn't even have to use a numeric PIN. But the reason you do this is because it's actually really hard to guess that length of numbers. Like when I have something where I might be intimidated into handing over my phone, I actually want to make sure that I don't use a short code or something that's going to be easy for somebody to just guess every possible combination. This is one of the strongest ways we can make sure that our phone, even if someone else has it in their possession, it becomes almost useless to them if they don't understand my strong PIN code. So honestly, I also like to note that if somebody demands access to your phone, you may decide it is safer to give them your PIN than to resist. If you're going to have to do that, then we recommend that a lot of these other tactics are especially useful because then they make the data that's on your phone a lot less permanent and a lot less useful. So for example, we often hear too about things like, people are concerned often about use of Google keyword warrants and things like that. We often then can browse instead in an incognito window or a private browser window. Basically, it deletes your browsing history for this session on this device, which again, really helpful just to keep that particular search off of your phone. You can manually clear your history in Safari, Chrome, or Firefox. There are also, I'm going to note, and some of the folks in the chat might actually have some ideas on ones they like, browsers that are specifically made to use these sorts of devices or to use these sorts of searches. So there's some out there like Brave. I know Firefox is a very privacy-minded browser, so you can kind of find one that works best for you. So we also want to talk about using platforms that protect your privacy or are built for privacy. Search histories have been used to criminalize people for pregnancy outcomes. So whether you're helping yourself or someone else, you might want to look at things like DuckDuckGo, which doesn't store search history or share it with advertisers. Browsers will allow you actually to set DuckDuckGo as your default search engine instead of Google. And some folks in the chat might have other ideas on other services they like as well. So again, with browsers, we do like Firefox. Firefox Focus actually automatically clears your browser history when you close the app. Other browsers may work better with apps like Zoom. I actually want us to all get in the habit of thinking also about using browsers that are for specific purposes. So like I often have to, for my job, use Google Chrome because it is easier for me to, join a particular kind of meeting from that particular browser. But then when I have more privacy focused concerns, I will use Firefox instead. So this is probably one of the most important things we're going to cover today, which is that your phone company actually keeps all copies of SMS texts, which are those green bubble texts that you might have with somebody who does not have the same kind of phone as you, plus metadata about who you text and when, including your location. So instead, we often recommend that there are a lot of different open source end-to-end encrypted apps like Signal, which are highly recommended for all of your chatting. Honestly, we prefer things like Signal over advertising focused apps like WhatsApp, but it's going to depend on your risk tolerance. So feel free to try a few of them and see which ones you like best. So bonus, turn on your disappearing messages in Signal. It protects against someone with access to your phone seeing past messages. So phones are often confiscated at things like border crossings or during an arrest, and the pressure can unlock your phone can be intense. Disappearing messages prevent someone with access to your phone from seeing your past messages. So you can use, often this is something you're going to hear people talk about on the internet a lot. That phone service provider who has access usually to my text messages is also going to be the way that I get to the internet using my data service. So as my internet service provider at home, or my internet service provider, which is my phone company for my phone, has the ability to see sites I visited previously. Using a VPN or a privacy-focused browser like Tor actually transfers your data and who you're trusting to hold that data to a VPN provider. So we often ask people to choose a paid, trustworthy, no logs VPN, or Tor, which is a trustworthy, frequently tested by security experts, open source private browser. So those also hide your IP address from the sites that you're visiting, which is kind of cool. You can download Tor for free, or you can pay a few dollars a month for no logs VPN. I think they're super useful tools. So we also, at Digital Defense Fund, we make a lot of comics. We love to have zines that you might find useful to kind of pass out with your group or kind of go through to learn a little bit more about threat modeling and some of the things that we might consider. So we have one here where our little friends Pigeon and Duck try to basically figure out how they can help their friends who are dealing with a type of medical care for birds that is now in this bird world against the law. So generally speaking, we want to remember that for this presentation and also for our little bird friends here, that none of the advice we've talked about today makes it 100% secure to potentially break the law, but it makes those who want to look into it work harder and pay more for your data if you're accused of it. So honestly, we try to use sort of art and fun and lightness to be able to kind of communicate security culture and what is necessary to change about how we work together. So, and I'm going to spend my last little bit of time just kind of sitting on this mobile quick settings guide. Within that particular privacy guide that we issue online, there is this that kind of aggregates a lot of the information that you saw. This is basically just a set of those different recommendations for the different aspects of how you might use your phone. Again, I'm going to reiterate that there's a little bit of nuance here, which is that copies of this data may be kept by the companies who actually you use. So what we're trying to do when we do these settings is to make sure that there are fewer copies. There's not a copy on my physical device that could be confiscated from a person during arrest. Often we can even, by using these apps and making more conscious decisions about what we do or don't put in them, actually keep companies from getting them as well. So we definitely love for folks to share these. This is, I think, a really, really important set of resources. All of those previous tips you saw, we put them into like Instagram friendly format. There's also a poster that you can print out and put in a community space or somewhere that is accessible to you and others. And I'm looking forward to kind of hearing some of the questions and discussion, just because this is like a lot of changing information, but we're all going to like work together to test new tools, figure out how we want to work together. Because of course, as I pass this back to my wonderful colleagues, the best security is actually a function of community and how we decide like who is part of our group that we want to work with, and what are our standards for communication, what goes in Signal versus what never goes on my phone at all. We talk about it in person. So thanks for letting me have about 20 minutes to chat about that. And I'm looking forward to hearing more. Let me stop sharing.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
And yeah, looking forward to getting to some of the questions coming up in the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my windows. Yeah, so maybe we could now hand it over to our guests from Roe Fund to maybe just kind of give us an update on like local resources, what's going on locally, and then can move into questions, and maybe can also expand on some of these things that have come up. So
Yeah, I did want to first of all, Kate, that was really helpful information. I did want to touch a little bit on the history of Oklahoma of criminalizing people. Oklahoma is actually #1 in the world for incarceration of women. 90% of whom are survivors of domestic violence or trauma. So I also did want to point out that reproductive justice and abortion access, it intersects with, like Kate had mentioned, people who use drugs, including prescription drugs, who have been criminalized. Pregnant people have been surveilled for using their legal OMA cards here in Oklahoma, their medical marijuana cards. And it also intersects with folks of color, white supremacy, police violence, state surveillance. So I did want to give some statistics. So the something else that Kate mentioned, she had a map of the country. And if you notice, Oklahoma is the only state in the entire country that has that trifecta of we criminalized self-managed abortion. We also criminalize harm to the fetus without specific protections for pregnant people. And so that loophole legally is a person who's pregnant cannot be charged for a crime that led to the demise of an unborn child unless the pregnant person committed a crime that caused that demise, right? So that crime could be self-managed abortion is a crime, drug use, even prescription medications can be a crime. We even had either it was Jim Olson or Warren Hamilton, who are two lawmakers in Oklahoma, were talking on the congressional floor in Oklahoma this year about how maybe we should criminalize pregnant people riding horses because they know they might fall down, and if they get hurt, that's manslaughter. So this has been going on for years in Oklahoma. Most recently, between around 2016 to now, there have been at least 45 people across Oklahoma who have been charged with felony child abuse, child neglect, all because of pregnancy outcomes. Between 2006 and 2020, that has been around 75 cases and is likely in under count. And this is all from the National Advocates for Pregnant Women. The most criminalization they have been seeing has been in Comanche County. two examples out of Comanche County recently have been Brittany Pula she is an Indigenous teenager who was sentenced to 4 years in prison for manslaughter after she presented to the emergency room with a miscarriage. That was in Lawton, Comanche County last year. Emily Akers, also in Comanche County, was charged with manslaughter after her miscarriage. I believe her charges were dropped, but Brittany Pula is halfway through a 4-year prison sentence for her miscarriage. And then out of all the states in the country, Oklahoma is ranked number 4 for punitive and forced interventions against people in connection to pregnancy outcomes. And so we are forcing interventions, jail time, prison time for people who are pregnant, maybe using drugs. So we have seen this in Oklahoma, and we know that district attorneys are already looking at search histories, online purchases, text messages, like Kate had been mentioning. So that's something I did want to just kind of go over. Something else, I just wanted to quickly go over the laws, the legal landscape right now in Oklahoma. So Roe fell federally June 24th, but Oklahoma had been the only state in the whole country to already have zero legal abortion access up until a month before then. So May 25th is when SB 1503 had been in effect. So that bans abortion around 6 weeks, and it has that aiding and abetting, quote unquote, clause for a $10,000 bounty for folks who, quote unquote, aid and abet, so supporting anybody getting an abortion. We also had HB 4327 that went a little bit further in banning abortion from, quote unquote, fertilization. So that unfortunately closed every single clinic here in Oklahoma. Both of those are civil charges. And then the day Roe fell, we had a trigger law, which has been a law that has been in the books for 112 years. It was written in 1910. And the only reason it was not in effect was because Roe legally, or Roe federally, was kind of holding it back. But with Roe no longer in place, we have Title 21, Section 861, which is a 100-plus-year-old law, which is a complete ban on abortion, as well as potential criminal charges for folks who perform procedures. Now, because we banned self-managed abortion and have jailed people, imprisoned people for miscarriages, I'm wondering if that's something we'll see an increase in. And then end of August, unless the courts block this, we're going to have SB 612 go into effect, which is also a complete ban. Criminal charges for, I believe, either manslaughter or murder, 10 years in prison with $100,000 fine. We're one of the most severe abortion bans in the entire country. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're trying to get as much legal information as we can. And that's just kind of an overview. So if we have any questions or anything else to add.
Sorry, trying to mess with these views again. View, there we go. Gallery. Thank you so much. That was a really great overview of, the fairly, I guess, draconian situation here in Oklahoma. We have a couple questions in the chat. Right away, I was wondering maybe if Roe Fund you could expand on just Plan B access in Oklahoma. That was something we we're kind of talking about earlier, and the extent to what that's available and whether that's
Mm-hmm. For Plan B, that is not an abortion sufficient. I never know how to pronounce that, but Plan B does not cause an abortion. It delays ovulation and prevents implantation. So it is legal right now. You can buy Plan B without a prescription, and there's no age limit to buy. But, and then Kate maybe can add to this, in terms of buying it, I'm sure we would want, I'm sure it might be safer to buy it with cash, put your phone on airplane mode, or not take your phone with you when you go to somewhere to buy it in person. And I also did want to say, in Tulsa County, the Take Control Initiative does provide Plan B and pregnancy tests in the county. And I believe the Oklahoma Harm Reduction Alliance has been mailing pregnancy tests to folks. And we can go over Plan C, because that's the something that is criminalized. I don't know if Kate wanted to add in terms of safety for buying Plan B or pregnancy tests.
Yeah, honestly, one of the things that I highly recommend is cash is king. It's one of the things I think we've all kind of forgotten over the years, myself included, that generally speaking, like when you go and you buy purchases online, often there's more of just a risk. I think that like your ad tracker ID kind of flags with, purchases online with things like Plan B or pregnancy tests, but I certainly also don't want that to be a barrier to expense. I don't necessarily think that those things are going to be made into a crime. It's very difficult to enforce on. Certainly people purchase those things all the time. People who want to keep pregnancies also purchase pregnancy tests, probably far more than a lot of us actually. So if you'd like, I think the most private way actually is to use cash and buy in person. One of the other things that you can do online is to use other sorts of services that sort of hide your ID from the actual place that you are purchasing from. But those are a little bit of a higher tech solution. They're often sometimes paid services like privacy.com that basically use a sort of shield number in between. Often when we're thinking about like secure, it's like secure from who and secure for what purpose. So in this case, if I just don't want that purchaser to have my information, probably buying in person is probably the most ideal, which seems not intuitive, but I hope that helps.
Sorry, adjusting the knobs. Is this working for you, speaker? Okay. We have a couple questions in this stream, and yeah, this is a good time. Anyone watching, if you have questions you want to ask or things to go more in depth on. First question was just about Google saying they would be working to wipe history around searching for abortions. How accurate or true might this be?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So actually Google had said that they were going to limit location history tracking around particular facilities that they had defined as sort of a being as sensitive. They could include, I mean, honestly, the thing that is helpful is when companies do not silo off abortion clinics, but also note that there are lots of kinds of facilities that are very sensitive to somebody's personal history, including, treatment for drugs and alcohol. There could be somebody who has certain kinds of surgeries that can be very personal. The issue, I think, there is that it is one step of what should be a more comprehensive solution. Location history is not typically what we've seen as being the most sensitive thing in prior cases where people have been prosecuted for pregnancy outcomes. It's usually been the search history itself. I should note that any of us can set our own settings on our Google search to not keep everything forever. So do definitely go in your privacy settings and familiarize yourself there. But I do think still, I am always trying to push companies like Google to do better, because frankly, like when you are pregnant and you don't want to be, beginning to Google about your situation is intuitive. And I shouldn't have to worry that that's going to be something that can incriminate me later. So I wish it counted for search histories. So that's my sad clarification there.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of, I guess, somewhat follow-up is, can the ISPs still keep a log of what IPs your router makes connections to regardless of browser? And would that be the idea of like using a VPN or something like the Tor browser?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Because I think honestly, it's something that I didn't really get until I started to learn more about how VPNs work. But generally speaking, what your ISP sees, so your internet service provider, for anybody who's not super familiar with that, the VPN is basically a special tunnel to the internet. So I'm paying for a sort of like, instead of walking across the street, I'm paying for a ticket on a subway that's like below ground. My internet service provider actually can only see my connection with the VPN, which is actually kind of cool. So I get a full masking of those logs, the log of what websites I'm connecting with. I've entrusted my VPN to actually only be the only party to those and to hopefully not keep them. And if you go on the different VPNs websites, you can often see a transparency report or privacy report that will tell you under what circumstances they've been actually made to prove that they don't keep the logs of where you were visiting. So that's the sort of like how we know of like why a VPN is different and why they can be potentially safer to use if you don't want your internet service provider to see where you're visiting. So I hope that makes sense. Obviously, you can see then that you were connecting through Tor. I think honestly, what's sort of just to know that like visiting Tor is not a crime. Being like, you just definitely wouldn't want to do an activity on Tor that like, it's just very clear that there was only like one person on that. Like there was a situation actually where somebody who had wanted to get out of a test at a university had set in a bomb threat via a like Tor service. And unfortunately, the school was able to tell on their internet service provider that only one user was actually using Tor at that time. So like they will be able to see what you are using, whether it is Tor browser or your VPN or your other browser, but they cannot generally see the content. So just don't do anything super specific content wise that would give somebody reason to look into it that deeply. Yeah. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have a couple questions for Roe Fund. Could you expand on what you were saying that the DA is already checking internet searches?
We know that Brittany Hula and then folks like her have already been charged, sentenced. But in general, one specific case I was thinking about, going back to not specifically abortion, but going back to reproductive justice in general, which is, how safe are we in our communities to raise our children or not have children if we don't want to? But Rebecca Hogue is a woman in prison right now in Oklahoma for being a survivor of domestic violence. So her abuser murdered her child while she was at work. She complied with the police. She loved her child. She was a survivor of domestic violence, and the police used her Google search about child abuse, or what are these bruises on my child's body? Is he kind of playing and hurt? That was used in her case, and she was looking at life in prison. And so she was charged. She is currently in prison. And so we already know whether it's abortion or miscarriage, or even just being a survivor of violence. DAs are already looking at folks' Google searches and using that to criminalize them.
Thank you. And then, this might be a little more expanded, but question: what's the current legality of helping people travel out of Oklahoma for abortions? And yeah, maybe we could talk a bit about that. I know it's not necessarily, there's steps involved in that can't be they're not digital security questions necessarily, but
Sure.
yeah.
That's a good question. I know we do have that aiding and abetting clause in a couple of our laws. I guess I'll say I'm not a lawyer, but I have been listening to ACLU and the Center for Reproductive Rights. My understanding is the banning travel out of state is very complicated. It would that would bring up multiple states' laws and then federal law. So that's not something I can speak on super confidently on. I will say lawyers are all, having different interpretations. So it's just an example of it's an unprecedented time for sure. I will say another resource to maybe put in the chat for folks is the Repro Legal Helpline. It's reprolegalhelpline.org. And so if you have specific questions about your specific case, your identities, your experiences that might make you more vulnerable to criminalization or surveillance, that's a really good helpline to kind of just talk about some legal issues or questions you might have.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I just wanted to build on that because, it's very complicated. I know that like states will certainly have their work cut out for them to try and criminalize a very foundational piece of like our, interstate life in the United States. But one piece to just consider is that like often when we're talking about the risks of a lot of these pieces of data that are collected, including the ways that our phone tracks our location from place to place, these pieces of data only really become part of the puzzle when there's something called probable cause, which means that there's an allegation of an individual crime that occurred. So like some of the stuff that we're thinking about when we think about the dangers of going out of state, it's generally going to be who ultimately tries to make the fact that a person left the state somebody's problem. So is it, often it might be somebody who the person trusted with that information that they were going from place to place. So I think kind of thinking very carefully about how we mitigate the risks is going to be a lot about helping ensure that anybody we help move across state lines, that they understand what their own personal threat model in their life might be. Are there people who you wouldn't trust with this information? Am I taking them to a place that they know that they'll get trusted care from physicians and other medical staff who will support them? So those are some of the biggest things we can do to sort of shrink the footprint of what we don't know to hopefully what we do know.
Thank you. I think we're getting to the end of our questions. So yeah, if anyone has any kind of final questions, please ask. This is a good time to ask them. So last question in the chat here is just asking for clarification around the self-managed abortion ban in Oklahoma. Is that because our bans are against ones who administer the abortion procedure? And I guess maybe as a follow-up to that question, could we just talk a little more about self-managed abortion? Roe Fund, you have the MA hotline in your image.
So Plan C, or like the abortion pill, it does cause an abortion, unlike Plan B. It is one of the safest medications in the world. Multiple countries have looked at it. It is safer than basically anything we do. It's safer than Tylenol, ibuprofen, Viagra. It is safer than a colonoscopy and a root canal. So there's no reason for the FDA to kind of regulate it. But in Oklahoma, even before Roe, this is just our regular landscape during Roe, but we ban telehealth. So that means you can't, from your home, talk to a doctor and then have them ship a medication to you. We also ban self-managed abortion, but a really cool resource I did want to point out was plancpills.org. So when you go on there, it'll ask what state you live in, and it's just giving you, they don't sell medication, but they give you just information, which is still legal to do. So if you put in Oklahoma on plancpills.org, it'll say you live in a state that restricts access to abortion, but alternate routes of access may still be possible. So what I like is it gives an example, just like a story of what someone might do if they're in Oklahoma needing to self-manage an abortion at home with pills. So the example that they give at the bottom is folks can do telehealth appointments virtually in states that do allow that. So for example, Plan C lists Colorado and New Mexico, I think, are the closest ones to us. So there are places where you can be virtually seen. They will not ask where you live. And Plan C does give examples of what some folks may do, which is mail forwarding, having the prescription go to someone who lives nearby that's trusted near the border, on a state that does allow that. So that's a really good resource to just get information on what Oklahoma criminalizes and then how some folks can still get access. I will say also, I think you have pointed out the M&A hotline. So for folks who have questions about managing an abortion or a miscarriage at home, mahotline.org. They do have a phone number as well. It is a helpline run by doctors, medical folks who are pro-abortion. So they will be able to give you a little bit more information on self-managing at home. And then another option as well is traveling out of state is still an option. So for that, let's see, ineedana.org is another place you can go. It'll tell you what clinics are open in states that do legally allow clinics. And then once you find a clinic that has an appointment, go ahead and call them, let them know that you need support funding the procedure and possibly traveling, and they will directly refer to funds like Roe that are able to support with both the procedure funding and the actual travel to get there. Oh, and I'm sorry, the last link I wanted to talk about was abortionfunds.org. That lists every abortion fund and practical support organization that is part of the National Network of Abortion Funds.
No, I think that covered it really well. Thank you.
Great. One last question that I'm a little confused on. I'll just read it and then I'm going to ask a paraphrase question. But any comments on the viability and risks of leaderless orgs, DAOs, and anonymous cryptocurrencies if laws move to criminalize financial donations? So I know, Kate, you talked about cash is king, and yeah, I guess Bitcoin could be a way of like making these purchases.
Yeah. Honestly, I think like this is a really like insightful question, but I think honestly, I have my own perspective, which is that I think we love the idea of cryptocurrency being anonymous, but I think generally speaking, it's really hard in practice to both have like as a first time high stakes user to kind of like navigate the space of that currency. I think also there are a couple of other challenges being that like, you know, while the currency itself might be anonymous, getting it to transfer into dollars that can pay for an abortion or not. Also, it's not always a great idea to have something that's really sensitive on a system that will be written permanently to a particular type of register. And I think so, honestly, it's really interesting to think about, I think, in theoretical side of things. And I think good for folks to like be continuing to explore and understand what they know about like these different currencies and how they're utilized. But like, and I'm not speaking from, you know, any point of view that isn't having tried to use them myself or understanding how they work in other dimensions of our lives. But just that like, there's a lot of challenges, I think, in practice to getting it to be as anonymous, as fungible, as legally viable as we think they are. So I would say though, keep getting creative. Like, I think frankly, one of the things I forget all the time is that there are ways that like financials and cash work that we often forget. Like it actually is perfectly legal to mail money in the mail. Like your grandma sends you $20 in the mail and up to a very high amount, that is perfectly fine. Nobody has any interest in policing it. So, but just thinking constantly about like different schemas of anonymity or getting other people's help, like sheltering the same risk is, I think, still something that we can take from the spirit of cryptocurrency and try to reapply to other places where we use money. So I hope that was a decent answer for a very complicated, ultimately question.
Yeah, that was great. And I think, yeah, seeing similar comments in the chat about, yeah, difficulties of cryptocurrencies. I think that's it in terms of questions. I feel like we have covered kind of the main things we wanted to cover. Any last words, or also, I know you both are in like some of the busiest weeks of your lives, and so happy to let you go. But yeah, just thought I'd open that up.
Yeah, I was gonna say I appreciate everybody and then us holding the space to talk about it, talk about abortion. I always end with just saying abortion is always going to be our human right. There's always going to be abortion, and we have a really awesome community of repro family around the country, around the world, who have been fighting for this for decades. So I'm just really happy to be in community with all of y'all.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna like plus one to all of that. And I think my common phrase that I've been reiterating time and time again, because a lot of this is going to be we don't know what we don't know yet. A lot of stuff's going to be challenged in court. A lot of people are going to try different forms of support and travel. And I would just say don't comply in advance. Like don't guess that something is super illegal before somebody informs you that it is, especially if you're in a job where you hold certain information on other people's behalf or are responsible for care work for people who might be pregnant or become pregnant. Get consult where you need it. Like definitely just don't believe already that something is illegal when you have not been told that it is. So, like use your best judgment, talk to your peers, but just like, don't comply with authoritarian demands that don't exist yet, and be there for each other. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to you both. That was really great. I think I'll just add, if anyone has suggestions for kind of follow-up conversations that would be helpful to them, yeah, please reach out through various channels. And also, I think stay tuned, might try and do some kind of office hours types training, just if anyone wants help going over some of the tools talked about today. We could meet at the space and kind of go over stuff in a safe and yeah, private environment. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank y'all. Bye.